Hello everyone, Laura K. Buzz here, and I've been playing The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and a bunch of you out there have questions about this game. And that makes sense, I understand that. I'm here today to answer a bunch of questions that you've asked on Twitter. I'm gonna try and keep this as spoiler light as possible, but also, you've got questions and I want to answer them properly, so I'm gonna answer them as best I can. If there's a question that you don't want to know the answer to, just like skip forward 30 seconds and yeah, there'll be other questions, I'm sure. So, in no particular order, let's dig in. Samantha on Twitter asks, we know Koroks are back. Any idea just how many? Oh, and are they still used to expand inventory? So, I don't know the final number of Koroks, but they are back, and I'm gonna guess from having played a bit of this, it's probably like 900 again. It's probably very similar to the original Breath of the Wild, but there's a lot of quests that give you more than one Korok seed at a time, and they're a lot more willingly handed out. They are still used to expand your inventory, so they're still a thing you're going to need to keep an eye out for. Samantha also asks, has Nintendo allowed anything to cross over from your Breath of the Wild save? Short answer, yes. Long answer, there might be other things. I don't know extensively what carries over, but I do know that your horses that you have in your stable in Breath of the Wild do carry over to Tears of the Kingdom. There might be other things that carry over. That's the obvious one I'm aware of. Lastly, Samantha asks, do amiibo function the same as in Breath of the Wild? They do, in as much as your rewards seem to be dependent on how far into the game you are, and you can scan them once a day, and they summon, if it's a Zelda amiibo, probably a chest with something kind of unique, and also some just random drops around the chest. The first time you scan a particular Zelda amiibo, you're probably going to get a paraglider skin that is related to that amiibo. After that, you'll get other unique things, usually. Maggie J. Evans asks, has the weapon degradation been rebalanced at all? If anything, weapons feel a little more fragile than they used to. But the system that's in place here with weapon fusion does a couple of things. It makes weapons feel a bit more throwaway just by their sheer nature. You are constantly, like, basically every enemy you kill is dropping a horn that could be stuck on the end of a stick to make a blade. You constantly have a supply of things that could be made into weapons. Everything feels like it's meant to be a little bit disposable. But also, if you have just a tree branch and you've not fused anything to it and you're doing a fight and it's about to break, you can fuse something onto it and that will completely replenish its durability and give you, I think, 25 hits in which its durability won't go down again. So it's a full refresh of durability and 25 hits where your durability doesn't go down. But that's a one-time benefit. It's only the first time you fuse something to a weapon. So what you maybe want to do is use a weapon until it's about to break, then fuse something to it for the first time. Then it'll have 25 hits of invincibility. Then another go down of the durability, and like it does extend the life of a weapon if you are particularly attached to something you only have one of. But like the game wants you not to think about it that way and to just be like, look, these things are meant to be throwaway, just go and make weird shit. Sinisphere asks, same question I dread asking for every Switch game. How's the performance? It's definitely better once you've installed version 1.1, which is not on the cartridge, but is available as a day one patch. There are definitely moments where the game will have little bits of slowdown. If you've seen preview footage and some of the preview footage that Nintendo put out where there was a big fight in a sort of bokoblin camp by a tower, and there was some real rough slowdown, not seen anything like that in Tears of the Kingdom itself. That particular area, doing a big explosion in a big crowded camp of enemies did have a little momentary chug, but I was honestly really impressed at the performance. It keeps to a pretty well locked 30 FPS, which is impressive when you can go from like one of the sky islands and like skydive all the way down to the surface with no loading screen, and then paraglide a huge distance vertically or sort of horizontally across the land, and then land in a thing, and there's no loading screens, and then you start doing a fight. Like, there's a really good degree of like really large draw distance for coming from the sky down to the surface. Really good management of like loading things in stably so there's like no slowdown and no loading screens. It is a seamless world, and that is all the more impressive here. It's still a game on Switch, but it is impressive how much they have squeezed out of this open world. Loki on Twitter asks, I'd like to know if gyro controls make a return at all. I remember struggling a fair bit with them back in Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, thanks to my dyspraxia. So, optional motion controls for aiming do exist. If you would like to be able to tilt your controllers to aim your bow or whatever, or aim where you're going to throw something, you can do that. You can turn it off in the options. I think what you're asking about is mandatory motion controls in the way that Breath of the Wild had apparatus, that you were forced to use motion controls to manipulate objects in 3D space for things like that sort of ball tilting maze. That's all gone. There is no mandatory motion controls in this game anymore. Any object you're trying to rotate in 3D space, you do so with the D-pad now. There is no mandatory motion controls that you have to use. Every Splatling asks, accessibility options like high contrast UI or color deficiency settings? No, unfortunately not. I have an accessibility review for the game that should be up by now, but no, it's basically the settings you saw in Breath of the Wild for the most part. Baja Blastoise on Twitter asks, is it too creatively open, with all the mixing and matching of materials and items and whatnot? I've been avoiding trailers, but from what I've seen, it seems like it could be overwhelming to have that much freedom in how you can play the game. I've not found it to be so. Your choices creatively for most of this game are, do I want to glue something onto my shield or my sword or my bow? And that's like, usually my sword has nothing on it and I want my sword to like be able to club things because I want to break a rock. I'll stick a heavy thing on the end of it and do that. Like, it's moment to moment, what do I need my weapon to do? I'll stick a thing that does that on the end of it. Or occasionally I'm in a shrine and I need to solve a puzzle and I have usually these tools in my pocket or these tools in the shrine. How do I stick them together to solve this puzzle? The building contraptions mechanic in this game is introduced to you slowly over time. Several hours will pass at a time between you getting access to new things you could build a contraption out of, and you're given several hours to go, cool, I understand how to use this towards my aims, before you're given anything new to play with. It doesn't feel like it just throws 1,000 options at you and goes, okay, just work it out. It doles things out to you at a pretty reasonable pace. Richie on Twitter asks, does Tears of the Kingdom do a good job ushering in a new player who didn't play Breath of the Wild? Conversely, if someone did play Breath of the Wild, how gentle or harsh is the adjustment to the new game, either controls-wise or mechanics-wise? Okay, so there's two things here. Tears of the Kingdom is undeniably a Breath of the Wild sequel, and I mean this narratively, in mechanically as well, but this is a game that sort of expects you to know the characters of Breath of the Wild and expects you to have played. And there's a character profiles tab, and you can read up on who these people are and why you might care about them. But this is Breath of the Wild happened, and then a few years passed, and now we're doing this in the same world. And characters are going to know who you are. Like, characters will go, oh, it's Link, I know you, we interacted in the past. I feel like this game wants you to be a returning player from Breath of the Wild, and while you can just, play it as your first, without having played Breath of the Wild, you're going to get more out of it if you played Breath of the Wild. In terms of the question of Breath of the Wild returning players and how they're going to get on, there is some mechanical adjustment. If you've just finished, say, replaying Breath of the Wild, things on your button layout aren't the same as they used to be, and you're going to spend a while trying to do the button combination that Breath of the Wild would do for a thing and it not working because it's Tears of the Kingdom. I think that the setup they have now is really intuitive and it makes a lot of sense, but it does take a bit of getting your brain to adjust to a new control scheme, given that this looks like the last game you played, but it plays differently, and that disconnect takes a little adjustment. Shane asks, is the combining mechanic necessary? Like, am I forced to do it, or can I get through the game never having to use it? Shrines will definitely require you to do the fusing mechanic. Like, I will give a spoiler light example of a shrine, just a singular shrine in the game. There is one where there is a big sphere, and you need to get it into a hole that's like up over a big wall. And the shrine has some hot air balloon components, and you basically need to work out how to make a hot air balloon strong enough to lift the ball up so you can take it where you're trying to go. Shrines will often require you to make contraptions to deal with things. In the moment-to-moment gameplay on the overworld, you can largely ignore it. There is an underground section to this game, and the underground kind of wants you to engage. It would like you to engage with those mechanics, but you can ignore them and just go on foot largely in the underground. That a lot of this game you can ignore doing the combining mechanic if you want to. You can use it only where it's required of you, and that's not too often. But they do like having puzzles in shrines that require you to creatively combine things. Darren Liff asks, I've heard some people who have played complain about the controls being finicky or difficult, especially during the building mode. Has that been your experience, and if so, how bad is it? So, I think I've touched on this in a couple of places. I think I've touched on this in this video. The rotating objects to build things mechanic is a little finicky when you start. First bit of advice, if you're struggling with it, try inverting the horizontal or vertical rotation controls, because that was what was tripping me up a little bit. I had to invert my horizontal rotation to make it feel like it worked. It takes a bit of getting used to the fact that you have two axes of rotation, horizontal and vertical, but sometimes things will be at a diagonal. Like, let's say I have a flat piece of wood that's diagonal like this, and I want it to be oriented like this. What I'm going to have to do is rotate it round horizontally, then vertically flatten it, then horizontally rotate it to here, then bring it up. Like, if you've got something at a diagonal, you have to go flatten, rotate around. Like, you have to get it into an axis that you have control over, and that can take some mental resetting to go, that's a diagonal, I've got to bring it round, flatten it down, bring it down, pop it up. Once you get used to it, it works well, but like it takes some getting into your brain. Project Headphones asks, how is Tears of the Kingdom graphically? We've heard speculation about how the engine has been optimised, but does it bear out in play? Breath of the Wild was good, with some lag in areas like the Korok Forest. Tears of the Kingdom promises to be more demanding. I've not seen any area in Tears of the Kingdom that struggled nearly as much as the Korok Forest in Breath of the Wild did. That's not to say those areas don't exist, but this generally has been a much more stable experience than Breath of the Wild was, which is impressive considering the ability to like fly from the sky down to the earth. Everything I've seen leads me to believe this generally, as a rule of thumb, runs better than Breath of the Wild did. In the game, Wayne asks, is it tears as in crying, or tears as in ripping up paper? It is tears as in crying. That is officially confirmed by Nintendo, and having played it, yep, it's like a kingdom of people who are crying. To quickly reiterate a question, Winters asks, the one thing I'm worried about is having to use menus a lot in combat. For example, it seems like you can fuse items mid-combat onto your arrows, which seems really powerful, but opening the menu to select what arrows you want repeatedly would be annoying. Is this a concern? As I said, not really. You pick the first, like, you open the menu to, like, select what thing you want to be repeatedly firing at that enemy, but then each time you want to add it to an arrow, you just tap up on the D-pad. Like, you don't even, like, properly let the menu open, you just tap up, it's on the arrow, fire it. It's not as much of a concern as I thought it would be. Vin asks, and again, this is kind of similar to a question we've had, but I'll reiterate. How heavy does the game lean on the new crafting and combining gimmick? Can you play it like a Zelda game if you want, or are you spending 50% of your time in crafting menus? I'm getting major Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts vibes from this, which is bad for me. You can really minimize how much of the, like, crafting and fusing you do. If you just want to, like, grab a sword off the floor and beat stuff up with that sword, and you want to ignore building machines unless you need something to get to a specific thing or you're in a shrine, you can largely ignore it. And there will be moments where building a thing would make a thing in front of you easier or more convenient, but you can usually find ways around it, even if it means coming back to a problem later. You can minimize how much of that you do, for sure. M. Cypher asks, big question is, how changed is the normal surface world? Like, I imagine it's generally the same map as before, with most of the big landmarks still around, but how much have they altered or filled out? Um, there's a lot of changes to places, that are familiar. The big changes are like filling a lot more places with people who have substantial quests to be done, but there's also. I'm going to give one example here that's like spoiler minimal, but I think gives you a sense of like how much there's like changes like you wouldn't expect hidden in plain sight. If you go to a town you already know from Breath of the Wild, in Breath of the Wild there are wells, and they're sort of filled up. They're not really functional. You can just go down wells now, and there are little caves down the bottom of them that lead to things. Like, there's little changes like this where it's like, even things that look like they haven't changed much could now be hiding a whole new thing to find. And like, most of the places are like more substantially changed than that. Like, Hatena Village was shown in one of the trailers to be very mushroom obsessed now, and like, a lot of things have changed as a result of that. There's a lot of like caves dotted around. There's a lot of like new additions of things to find. Like, it does feel like this isn't just the world from Breath of the Wild. I feel like I am exploring, even though like the topology is largely the same, I feel like I'm discovering this world for the first time again. And to manage that in a world you've already been to is impressive. Like, they've done a lot to hide cool things in plain sight all around you, as well as like the more obvious changes. Last Baby on the left asks, are there dungeons? Not like Divine Beasts, but like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess-esque dungeons. I talked about this a bit in my review. Kind of. Definitely more so than Breath of the Wild. There are dungeons that feel substantial and are larger in scope and are elementally themed and have bosses that aren't just reflavored Blight Ganons, but they're not the scope of, say, a Wind Waker dungeon. If you just look at, like, I got to the temple and it says I'm at the temple of whatever, and I have the map that says this is the temple. If you just look at that, yeah, it's going to be underwhelming compared to Wind Waker, while being more impressive than the Divine Beast. But, you know how in Skyward Sword, the journey to the dungeon was designed like a dungeon? In that there was like puzzles and like navigation to do and combat, and you had to sort of work your way through this elementally themed environment that led to the dungeon. This is similar to that, in that if you take into account the journey to the dungeon as being part of the dungeon, which I think you should, I think these are really memorable and really ambitious, and they scale up their journey really well. I think they are definitely a middle ground between like a traditional Zelda dungeon and a Divine Beast from Breath of the Wild. They definitely feel a lot more like traditional Zelda dungeons, even if they're not necessarily exactly what you're looking for. But I will also note that kind of like old Zelda dungeons where you would get like, I got the hook shot and that's now going to help me traverse this dungeon. It's not quite the same, but there are things unlocked as part of your journey to the dungeon and doing the dungeon that are progression abilities that will help you along your way. And like, that element of old dungeons has kind of come back. That was a thing that was sort of absent from the Divine Beasts. It definitely feels more like we're getting dungeons this time. Last couple of questions, I think, here. Jess asks, does Tears of the Kingdom still have towers and shrines? Does the map need to be revealed, and is there fast travel? There are still towers. There's a new kind of tower, but there's still towers. There are still shrines. The map does need to be revealed, and there is fast travel. Your fast travel points are generally shrines and towers. There are other fast travel points as well. That whole loop is basically the same as it used to be. And I think that'll do. We've been a little over 20. We've been about 20 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap up here. If you've got other questions, feel free to ask them down in the comments, and I'll do my best to keep on top of answering them in a spoiler-light way. But I hope this has told you the things you wanted to know about The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom.